The Life of Yuji Itadori, Jujutsu Kaisen. So, you just finished Season 2 of Jujutsu Kaisen and you want to know more, huh? Well, here at the Amagi, we got you covered. Yuji Itadori is the main protagonist of the Jujutsu Kaisen series. He's the son of Jin Itadori and Kaori Itadori, and the grandson of Wasuke Itadori. Yuji was living a normal life in Sendai City until he encountered Megumi and ate one of Sukuna's fingers. After becoming Sukuna's vessel, Yuji began attending Tokyo Jujutsu High alongside Megumi and Nobara as first-year students. Welcome to the Amagi. Today we're going over the life of Yuji Itadori. Before we begin, we noticed only a fraction of you are subscribed to the channel, so if you like the videos, please subscribe and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. Background. Yuji was born on March 20th, 2003 as the son of Jin Itadori and Kaori Itadori. While at the hospital, Wasuke Itadori told Jin that he was making a mistake staying with Kaori and that it would result in his death, causing Jin to retort to not say those things in front of the newborn Yuji, who would remember this conversation. Yuji was mostly raised by his grandfather Wasuke, who he thought of as a father. At some point during junior high, Yuji chatted with his classmates about how he's interested in Yuko Ozawa, although she's not very tall. His classmates wonder why, which Yuji explains how elegant Yuko is. During graduation, Yuji takes a photo with Yuko. Fearsome Womb Arc. Yuji is in the occult room with Sasaki and Iguchi when the student council president comes in to complain about the club. The president says that the club room is going to a different club since the occult club doesn't have 3 members. As the occult club is confused by this, Mr. Takagi shows up and reveals that he rewrote Yuji's application so that he would join the track and field team instead of the occult club. As Yuji complains, Mr. Takagi makes a deal that if Yuji can beat him, then Yuji can join the occult club. Yuji agrees to the deal since it'll be easy for him. Yuji takes on Mr. Takagi in shot put and easily manages to defeat him. Sasaki tells Yuji that he doesn't need to continue being in the club, which Yuji tells her that the club has grown on him and wishes to stay. Yuji notices what time it is and heads out. As Yuji passes Megumi, Megumi senses the presence of a cursed object on him and decides to follow him. Yuji arrives at the hospital that his grandfather's at and meets with him. The two start to talk, which Yuji's grandfather tells him to use his strength to help others and to be surrounded by others when he dies. Yuji tries to reply to his grandfather but notices that he's died, which he reports to the staff. After Yuji finishes the necessary paperwork, Megumi shows up and demands for the cursed object. Yuji says that he'll give it to him, but wants an explanation, which Megumi explains what curses are. After finishing the explanation, Yuji hands the box over, but Megumi finds that the box is empty. Megumi wants to know where the object is, which Yuji says that his senpai has it, and that they plan to unseal it tonight. Yuji and Megumi rush over to the school, which Yuji notices has a terrible pressure coming from the school once he gets close. As Megumi tells Yuji to stay back, Yuji remembers what his grandfather told him and heads in to help. Yuji manages to rescue his friends from a spirit, which Megumi uses this chance to exorcise the spirit. Megumi then asks why Yuji's here, which Yuji explains his reason. Suddenly, Yuji finds the cursed object, which Megumi explains that it's one of Sukuna's fingers. Another spirit appears, which forces Megumi to push Yuji out of the way. As Megumi gets tossed around by the spirit, Yuji jumps in and rescues him. Yuji takes on the spirit, but the spirit easily overpowers Yuji. Megumi explains to Yuji how it takes cursed energy to exorcise the spirit. Yuji wonders why the spirit's after the finger, to which Megumi says that the spirit wants to eat it in order to get stronger. Yuji eats the finger, which incarnates Sukuna, who easily exorcises the spirit. When Sukuna plans to start a massacre, Yuji takes back his body. Megumi tells Yuji that he will have to exorcise him since he's become a cursed spirit. Suddenly, Satoru Gojo arrives and wonders where the cursed object's at, which Yuji tells him that he ate it. Gojo tells Yuji to switch with Sukuna, but switch back after 10 seconds, which Yuji agrees to after some convincing. Yuji switches with Sukuna, which after 10 seconds, he switches back. After Yuji switches back, Gojo simply knocks Yuji out. Later, Yuji wakes up and notices that he's tied up in a room. Gojo tells Yuji that he's going to be executed, but they're going to suspend it for a period of time. As Yuji is confused by this, Gojo explains who Sukuna is, and how there are 20 of Sukuna's fingers that they can't destroy. Gojo also explains how they plan to have Yuji eat the other fingers and then execute him, which he then tells Yuji to choose his death. Afterwards, Yuji is allowed to check up on his friends and see how they're doing. After meeting with his friends, Yuji meets up with Gojo, who asks about his decision. After talking about how this might help people out, Yuji agrees to it and eats another finger. Yuji manages to hold Sukuna, which Gojo figures that Yuji is able to resist Sukuna. Megumi suddenly shows up, which Gojo and Megumi tell Yuji that he's coming to Tokyo with them as the 3rd first-year student of the Tokyo Jujutsu High. After they arrive at the college, Gojo escorts Yuji through the college to his interview with the principal. Before they go to the meeting, Gojo tells Yuji that it's possible that Yuji can fail his interview. As they arrive at the place for the interview, Yuji greets the principal of the school, Masamichi. Masamichi asks Yuji why he wants to attend school, which Yuji gives an answer that Masamichi doesn't like. Masamichi has one of his cursed corpses attack Yuji, and explains how it won't stop until he gets an answer from Yuji that he likes. After Yuji manages to restrain the cursed corpse and explain how he won't regret the way he lives in the end, Masamichi Masamichi accepts his answer and allows him to attend the school. Afterwards, Gojo brings Yuji to his dorm that he'll be staying at. While Yuji's decorating his room, Gojo explains to him that Yuji is now able to locate Sukuna's fingers like a radar. When Megumi comes out of his room, Gojo tells the two that tomorrow they will be going to pick up the last of the first year students, Nobara Kugisaki. The next day, Yuji talks with Megumi about how there's so few shamans before they head out to go get Nobara. When Gojo shows up, all three of them head to Harajuku to pick up Nobara. After they pick up Nobara and introduce themselves to each other, Gojo brings them to Roppongi for a mission. Once they arrive at the location, Gojo explains that Yuji and Nobara are going to exercise a spirit so that they can see their capabilities. Yuji brings up the fact that he can use cursed energy, which Gojo hands him a cursed tool to use, which is a slaughter demon. Gojo also tells Yuji to not let Sukuna out during the mission, which Yuji agrees. As Yuji and Nobara head in, Nobara forces the two to split up to find the curse, which Yuji doesn't agree with. As Yuji explores the lower floors, he comes across a spirit and exorcises it. Later, Yuji breaks through a wall in order to rescue a child that a spirit has taken hostage. As the spirit escapes, Yuji gives Nobara the spirit's arm that he had previously cut off, which he uses to exorcise the spirit. After a brief chat with Nobara, Yuji brings the child out to be taken home. After the mission's complete, Gojo decides to take them out to eat, which Yuji suggests beefsteak. A month later, Yuji, along with Nobara and Megumi, are brought to a detention center for a mission by Kiyotaka. Kiyotaka explains the situation at the detention center and how it's their job to just rescue any survivors to the three. When a parent comes to ask if their son's safe, Yuji decides to rescue the guy. As the three head into the center, they notice that the area has expanded. Megumi notices that the exit's gone, which Yuji and Nobara wonder what they're getting into. Megumi tells them that his Shikigami, which he had summoned, is capable of finding the exit, which Yuji and Nobara are glad about. The three then head deeper into the center, where they come across some corpses. Yuji examines one of the corpses and finds how it's the guy that they were looking for. Yuji decides to take the corpse back, which Megumi tells him to leave it. Yuji and Megumi then get into an argument, but stop when Nobara is teleported to another location. Before the two can react, a special grade cursed spirit shows up. Yuji quickly reacts and tries to attack it with his cursed weapon, but the spirit easily breaks it and even cuts off Yuji's arm. Yuji tries to get Sukuna to help them, but Sukuna refuses and even says that he will kill Yuji's friends. Yuji then tells Megumi to go rescue Nobara and to give a signal once they're out, since he'll switch with Sukuna by then. After Megumi leaves, Yuji takes on the spirit, but the spirit easily overpowers him. Yuji realizes how weak he is, but remembers what Masamichi had told him and decides to use his negative emotions against the spirit. The spirit easily catches Yuji's punch, but they both suddenly hear a wolf howl. After hearing this, Yuji switches with Sukuna. After the spirit is taken care of, Yuji fails to take back his body, which causes Sukuna to go after Megumi. After a while, Yuji manages to take back his body and then has a brief chat with Megumi before dying. Yuji's body is then taken to the school's morgue so that it can be examined. Later, Yuji finds himself inside of Sukuna's territory, where he starts a fight with Sukuna. Sukuna easily overpowers Yuji, and after restraining Yuji, tells him that they're not dead yet. Sukuna proposes to bring Yuji back to life, with some conditions that mostly benefit Yuji, which Yuji rejects and tells Sukuna to revive him. Sukuna proposes that they fight and the winner get their deal, which Yuji accepts, but Sukuna easily defeats Yuji. Before the examination can begin, Yuji is revived and greeted by Gojo. As Yuji gets a change of clothes, Gojo talks with Shoko about leaving Yuji as deceased on the records so that he can train Yuji for the upcoming event. Later, Yuji is brought to a room where Gojo explains how cursed energy and techniques work. As Yuji gets excited, Gojo reveals that Yuji can't use techniques, which causes Yuji to get depressed. Gojo tells Yuji that they're going to enhance Yuji's combat abilities with cursed energy and has Yuji punch his hand. As Yuji punches Gojo's hand, Gojo says that there's no cursed energy behind it and explains how negative emotions are what fuels cursed energy. Gojo then tells Yuji that he's going to have to train his cursed energy by watching movies. Gojo hands Yuji a cursed corpse and explains how he's going to learn to train his cursed energy flow by watching movies, and that the cursed corpse will attack him if he doesn't emit a constant flow of cursed energy. As Yuji starts his training, he has some trouble with it at first. Before Gojo leaves for a meeting with Masamichi, Gojo asks if Yuji met with Sukuna while he was dead, but Yuji tells him that he doesn't remember. Later, Yuji manages to get a hold of his training when Gojo shows up to teach Yuji about domain expansion. Gojo brings Yuji to where Jogo is, and after making Jogo angry by taunting him for being weak, he tells Yuji to not leave his side. As Jogo uses his domain expansion, Gojo explains to Yuji what kind of technique it is. Yuji then watches as Gojo easily overpowers Jogo. When Gojo starts to interrogate Jogo, Yuji and Gojo are distracted by Hanami's flower field technique. Yuji and Gojo try to stop him, but Hanami manages to escape with Jogo. Gojo then explains to Yuji how he will be training until the Kyoto Goodwill event. Yuji asks what the Kyoto Goodwill event is, which Gojo is surprised that he didn't tell Yuji about it. Versus Mahito Arc. A month later, Yuji is introduced to another sorcerer, Kento Nanami, who will accompany Yuji on a mission. After having a chat, Yuji and Nanami head out to go investigate an incident at a theater. While investigating the theater, Nanami teaches Yuji how to see remnants of cursed energy. The two follow the remnants, which lead them to the rooftop and encounter two spirits. Nanami has Yuji deal with one, while he deals with the other one. As Nanami deals with his spirit, he explains to Yuji how his technique works and why he's revealing it to him. Yuji then takes on his spirit and remembers how Gojo told him how his cursed energy has a habit of lagging. Yuji manages to wound the spirit, but Nanami stops him from killing it. The spirits are then examined, which Shoko tells them that they were once human. Shoko explains to the two how the spirits had died, and that it's not Yuji's fault. Yuji and Nanami then continue the mission, which Nanami says that they're going to have to go all out against their foe. Nanami and Yuji talk about the investigation, which Nanami has Yuji search for Junpei while he continues to investigate for the enemy's hideout. Yuji then head out with Kiyotaka to go look for Junpei. While searching for Junpei, the two discuss how they will reveal low-level cursed spirits to see what Junpei's reaction will be. Yuji comes across Junpei, who's talking with his teacher Sotomaru, and wishes to talk with him. Sotomaru intervenes, but Yuji deep-pants him and leaves with the pair, which forces Sotomaru to follow. Yuji then meets back up with Junpei, and the two head to the riverbank to talk. Yuji asks Junpei if he notices anything at the teacher he went to, which Junpei lies and says that he saw nothing. The two then start to chat and find out that they have a lot in common. Suddenly, Junpei's mother shows up, and after a brief chat, she invites Yuji over for dinner. Yuji then contacts Kiyotaka and informs him how he will be at Junpei's house. Yuji has a good time at Junpei's house, but when Junpei's mom goes to sleep, the two have a serious talk about Yuji being a sorcerer and what would happen if either of them killed a person. The next day, Yuji meets with Nanami and the two have a conversation about what had happened to Junpei. Afterwards, Nanami has Yuji observe Junpei for a while. Later, Yuji heads over to stop Junpei, much to Nanami's disagreement. Once Yuji reaches Junpei's school, the two get into a fight. Yuji manages to easily overpower Junpei because Junpei's Shikigami's poison has no effect on Yuji. Yuji wonders why Junpei's doing this and takes a hit from Junpei's Shikigami, which the two then start to talk. After listening to Junpei, Yuji tells Junpei to come to their school since they'll find the guy who did this to Junpei's mom. When Mahito shows up, Yuji is restrained and forced to watch as Mahito mutates Junpei. As Junpei attacks Yuji, the latter tries to get Sukuna to help Junpei, but Sukuna refuses to help just for his own sadism. As Junpei decays, both Mahito and Sukuna ridicule Yuji for thinking he can rely on the help of curses like them to help Junpei, loudly laughing at his naivete and making Yuji realize firsthand the extent of malice that curses are capable of. As Junpei dies, Yuji feels so profoundly disgusted at Mahito that he feels a genuine urge to kill him as he suddenly punches Mahito, surprising the curse as Yuji is able to injure his soul, deducing that Yuji is naturally aware of the contours of the soul due to being a vessel of another soul. As they trade blows, Mahito manages to corner and tries to force Sukuna to switch with Yuji, but Sukuna warns him not to do that again. Yuji manages to overwhelm Mahito, delivering a brutal onslaught on Mahito's face. But Mahito manages to get behind Yuji. As Mahito goes to strike Yuji, Nanami shows up and counters the attack. The two then have a brief chat about Yuji's condition and that Yuji is able to harm Mahito. Yuji and Nanami continue to fight Mahito. Mahito has Yuji fight his mutated humans while he takes on Nanami. As Mahito manages to restrain Nanami, Yuji shows up and frees Nanami. Yuji and Nanami then overwhelm Mahito, which forces Mahito to trap Nanami in his domain expansion. Yuji manages to break in, which causes Mahito to touch Sukuna's soul, resulting in Mahito being wounded. Yuji sees that Mahito's wounded and goes to finish him off, but Mahito escapes by using a decoy. After Mahito escapes, Yuji falls unconscious while still thinking that they have to get Mahito. Later, Yuji is with the deceased when Nanami meets with him. The two talk about what had happened today and what is a proper death. The next day, Yuji meets up with Gojo and Nanami while he thinks about how he won't lose again until he kills Mahito. Kyoto Goodwill Event Arc. On the day of the Kyoto Goodwill event, Yuji meets up with Gojo and Nanami. As Yuji expresses the desire to meet up with his friends, Gojo convinces him that they have to do it as a surprise, which Yuji agrees with. Later, after the Tokyo and Kyoto students and faculty meet up, Gojo arrives with a large box for everyone. Yuji pops out of the box, much to the shock of most people present. Nobara is upset with Yuji, who apologizes for keeping the fact that he was alive a secret. After the faculty explains the rules of the event, Yuji attends a meeting with the other Tokyo students to discuss their plan of action. After the meeting, Megumi checks to see how Yuji's doing after his training, which Yuji says that he's doing fine. When the event begins, Yuji travels with the other Tokyo students until they encounter Aoi. Yuji takes on Aoi, while the other students heads off in groups. Aoi manages to overwhelm Yuji and starts to leave after he thinks he's won. Yuji gets up and complains about Aoi stomping on his head. Aoi Todo asks Yuji what his type of girl is, which Yuji gives an answer that Aoi likes. As Aoi starts to fantasize about a school life that he and Yuji didn't have, Yuji is attacked by another Kyoto student. Yuji manages to evade most of their attacks, but suddenly finds himself cornered. Aoi then uses his ability to switch Yuji's location and forces the Kyoto students to retreat. Yuji and Aoi continue their fight, which Aoi thinks about how strong Yuji is, but says that Yuji's lagging cursed energy is wrong. Yuji then listens as Aoi says that Yuji's lagging cursed energy is making him weak, which Yuji agrees with Aoi that he can get stronger. Yuji continues to fight Aoi, which Aoi manages to take all of Yuji's blows. Yuji also listens as Aoi explains how cursed energy flows through a sorcerer's body. Yuji thanks Aoi and both agree to fight each other with all their strength. When intruders invade the site, Yuji notices that a screen is being placed over the site of the event. Later, Yuji and Aoi come to Megumi and Maki's rescue. After handing Megumi and Maki over to Panda to get them out of the screen, Yuji takes on Hanami alone. As Yuji takes on Hanami, he gets his chance and tries to land a black flash, but messes up. Aoi slaps Yuji and explains how anger can both help and interfere with his fight. Yuji then continues to fight against Hanami and manages to land a black flash on Hanami. After this, Yuji listens to Aoi as he explains how Yuji now understands what using cursed energy is like. Yuji and Aoi then start to fight Hanami together and manages to attack and evade Hanami. After figuring out what Hanami is capable of, Aoi starts to use his technique and the two manage to overwhelm Hanami. Yuji then manages to land 4 black flashes on Hanami and seriously wounds him. Yuji and Aoi continue to fight Hanami until they reach a point where Aoi uses his technique to switch Yuji with a cursed tool that's capable of harming Hanami. Yuji makes it back to the fight, but Gojo suddenly breaks through the screen. As Hanami tries to escape, Yuji goes to stop him, but Aoi stops him and explains how strong Gojo's hollow purple technique is. After the invaders have been dealt with, Yuji meets with Nobara and Megumi and talk about what had happened during the invasion. When Aoi shows up, Yuji runs away from him. Later, Yuji attends a meeting with the other students and faculty where they all agree to continue the event. When it's decided that they'll play a game of baseball, Yuji plays the catcher. When Noritoshi is up to bat, the two talk about why Yuji became a sorcerer, which results in Noritoshi getting all 3 strikes. When Aoi gets up to bat, Yuji holds Aoi after Maki hits Aoi with the ball. After the game is finished, the Tokyo team wins. Death Painting Arc. Days after the event, Yuji is being driven to a mission by Kaori, along with Nobara and Megumi. While being driven to the location, Yuji and the others talk about the details of the mission. Once they arrive at the location, they have to check the school of all of the victims, Saitama Urami East Junior High, for information. Yuji and Nobara are shocked that Megumi used to attend the school and asks around for any rumors about the victims. They find out about the Yasuhachi Bridge and decide to check it out. After hours of investigating, they head to a convenience store and discuss about how they didn't find any trace of cursed energy. Suddenly, 2 students of the junior high show up and reveal more information about the bridge and that Megumi's sister might be involved with the curse. Megumi decides to investigate by himself, while Akari brings Yuji and Nobara to the hotel. Later, Megumi is investigating under the bridge when Yuji and Nobara show up. Yuji and Nobara ask about Megumi's sister, which Megumi says that she might be killed by the curse. Afterwards, the 3 cross the river under the bridge and end up within the spirit's territory. As the 3 prepare to face the spirit, Kechizu suddenly enters the territory. Yuji decides to take on Kechizu, while Nobara and Megumi try to exorcise the spirit. Yuji manages to easily take on Kechizu, but wonders if the blood Kechizu spat at him is poisonous. When Nobara is suddenly pulled out of the territory by Eso, Yuji chases after Kechizu, who is also leaving the territory. While chasing after Kechizu, the 2 encounter Eso and see Eso's back. Eso then gets mad after Nobara attacks him and uses a technique against Yuji and Nobara. The 2 notice that Eso's blood is corrosive and runs away when Eso starts to fire at them. When Nobara is almost hit, Yuji picks her up and starts to run faster. Once they get far enough, Yuji stops, but Kechizu shows up and hits Yuji with his blood. As Nobara is worried about Yuji, Eso manages to land a hit on her. Eso then uses a technique and flower patterns appear on the wounds of Nobara and Yuji. Eso then explains to the 2 how his technique works and how long they have to live. As Nobara uses her technique on herself to stop Eso and Kechizu from moving, Yuji starts to punch Kechizu multiple times. When Eso undoes his technique and charges, Yuji starts to rush at Eso. Eso tries to attack Yuji with his technique, but Yuji uses Black Flash to blow Eso's arm off. After Kechizu is killed and Eso starts to cry, Yuji sees this and gets distracted. A car suddenly drives by and Eso gets on it, which Yuji chases after him. Nobara uses her technique to make Eso fall from the car. Yuji takes this chance to kill Eso. After having taken down Eso and Kechizu, Yuji and Nobara talk about their conditions after dealing with Eso and Kechizu. After talking, the 2 go check up on Megumi and find out that he's not dead. All 3 talk about what to do with Sukuna's finger, which Yuji says that he can just eat it, but Megumi tells him that they don't know how many fingers Yuji can consume. Megumi decides to have Yuji hang onto the finger since it looks the most fit, which Sukuna has a mouth appear on Yuji's palm and eats the finger. The 3 are shocked by what had happened, but Akari suddenly shows up and the 3 head off. 2 days later, Yuji is back at the college where Sukuna mocks Yuji for awakening his finger and resulting in people's deaths. Yuji simply tells Sukuna to not tell Megumi this. Later, Aoi nominates Yuji for a promotion to first grade sorcerer. Days later, the three finish another mission, which Yuji decides to go watch a movie he wanted to see. Later, Nobara texts Yuji to come to a diner, which he arrives faster than she had expected. Nobara is worried that Yuji won't recognize Yuko, but Yuji easily recognizes her and greets her. After talking with them for a little bit, Yuji bids Yuko farewell. Shibuya Incident Arc. Sometime later, Yuji along with Megumi and Nobara meet up with Gojo, who then takes them to meet with Utahime. Once they meet up with Utahime, Utahime tells them they're going to inspect one of the people they think is a mole. Utahime informs them that they suspect Kokichi Muta, who's the real identity of Mekamaru, as the mole, and explains what his ability is. Once they reach the place that Kokichi is supposed to be, they find out that Kokichi isn't there when they break in. On October 31st, Yuji is with Meimei and Uiui at Aoyama Cemetery, while Gojo handles the situation in Shibuya. When Meimei receives a call about a curtain appearing at Meiji Jingume Station, the three head out to check on the situation. Once they arrive at Meiji Jingume Station, they're informed that there's a second curtain with a curtain at the station. When they're informed that there are transfigured humans between the two curtains, Yuji thinks about how that it's Mahito's doing. After being informed about the station, Yuji waits with Uiui while Meimei checks up on the situation on the station. Yuji starts to get impatient, but Uiui calms him down. Once Meimei is finished investigating, she informs them about the situation that's happening in the station. Yuji asks if Mahito's in the station. Meimei tells him that she didn't see him, but he might be in the station since there are mutated humans in the station. Meimei then tells Yuji that they'll split up. Yuji then heads into the station through a different entrance. Once he gets inside, Yuji comes across a cursed spirit. Yuji asks the spirit if he's seen Mahito, which the spirit tells Yuji that Mahito is further in the station. After hearing the spirit's words, Yuji remembers what Gojo had told him about curtains and notices a cursed object behind the spirit. Yuji figures that the object is connected to the curtains and decides to break it. When the spirit starts to talk about how the humans taste after Mahito mutates them, Yuji starts to attack the spirit. Yuji tells the spirit to not underestimate humans, which the spirit says that Yuji isn't smart since he can't even guess what kind of curse he is. Yuji says that the spirit is a grasshopper curse, which the spirit thinks about how smart Yuji is. As the curse attacks Yuji, Yuji easily manages to dodge the curse's attack. As the curse continues to attack, Yuji analyzes the curse's capabilities and figures what the curse is capable of. Yuji figures that this is a fight of 2 arms versus 4 arms and starts his counter attack on the curse. Yuji starts to pummel the curse, which the curse decides to counter with his hidden trick. As the curse uses his abdomen to attack, Yuji grabs it and breaks it off. Yuji then kills the curse and breaks the object that it was protecting. Yuji then meets up with Meimei and Uiui, and the three head to where the trapped people are. While on their way there, Meimei compliments Yuji on his growth without using any techniques. Yuji comments about how his fight with the cursed spirit would have been harder if it was Mahito, but quickly accepts Meimei's compliment when Uiui gets angry at him. As they arrive at the station, they notice that all the people but one have left. Yuji asks the guy what had happened, which the guy says that everyone else was taken on a train and the person dies when his body deforms. Yuji gets angry that Mahito is here, but suddenly starts to worry about Gojo. Yuji, along with Meimei and Uiui, then head towards Gojo's location, but stop when Yuji is suddenly contacted by Kokichi. As Yuji goes to try and destroy the device on his ear, Kokichi says that he is their ally and that Gojo has been sealed. Yuji listens along with Meimei and Uiui, as Kokichi explains how he had already been killed days before, and he has set up a backup plan just in case something had happened to him. Kokichi also says that he was able to rule out both Meimei and Yuji as spies, as Meimei says that Kokichi could just be wrong, which Kokichi says that they are currently being followed by cursed users. Meimei notices that there are 2 of them, and asks Yuji if the users are then the curses he had faced, which Yuji replies that the 2 are stronger. Meimei says that they should continue on, but Kokichi tells them that there is a screen that won't let them through. Kokichi then tells them that Meimei should open a path, so that Yuji can head back and head to where Gojo is above ground. When the cursed users show up, Yuji prepares to fight along with Meimei and Uiui. Yuji manages to get past the 2 cursed users and make it to the surface. Yuji starts to head towards Shibuya, but on the way he's told by Kokichi that the enemy can move Gojo while the prison gate's boundary is processing him. Kokichi then proposes a plan to Yuji about how they'll have the groups of sorcerers surround the Shibuya station and attack all at once when the screen is brought down. Unfortunately, Kokichi tells Yuji that he can't get in contact with Kiyotaka. Once Yuji gets inside of the screen surrounding Shibuya, he notices that the people are being attacked by mutated humans. Yuji easily takes care of them and climbs a building. Once at the top, Yuji shouts for Nanami and announces that Gojo has been sealed. When Nanami and the others get to his location, Yuji listens as Kokichi explains everything to everyone and what they should do next. After Nanami agrees to Kokichi's plan, Nanami assigns Yuji, Megumi, and Takuma to deal with the screens while he heads out to meet with Kiyotaka. After Nanami leaves, Takuma informs the two that there are two problems with Gojo being sealed. Yuji listens as Takuma explains how the sorcerers that were saved by Gojo are going to be a nuisance with the authorities of the school, and that they would lose a war with all those that have hidden themselves in the shadow because of Gojo. After explaining how Gojo's sealing is dangerous for humanity, the three head out to deal with the screens. As Yuji tries to break through the second screen, they realize that the screen is too strong for them to force their way through. They discuss how they can slip through the screen, and that the caster of the screen is most likely within the screen itself. Suddenly, Takuma figures that the caster might be outside of the second screen, and explains how the screen becomes stronger with the caster being outside of the screen. The three then discuss where the caster might be, and figure that they may be at Shibuya Tower. As the three reach the Shibuya Tower, they use Megumi's Nue Shikigami to reach on top of the tower. As Yuji and Megumi distract the enemies, Takuma manages to break one of the cursed objects that have put up a screen. Takuma notices that one of the enemies has the other two cursed objects that are putting up the screens, which make Yuji and Megumi wrap Awasaka with wire and cause him to fall to the ground floor. As Yuji and Megumi find where Awasaka is, Megumi notices that the enemy is still alive. As Awasaka gets up, Yuji and Megumi prepare to fight him. As Yuji and Megumi fight Awasaka, they notice that their attacks aren't having any effect on him. Yuji and Megumi continue to fight Awasaka, but they notice that the enemy is just too tough. As Megumi tells Awasaka that Gojo is in Shibuya, but Awasaka reveals that he already knows that Gojo has been sealed, Yuji tells Megumi not to worry since his plan didn't work. As Awasaka says it's about time that he kills them, Yuji prepares to fight, but escapes when Megumi causes a distraction. As they're escaping, Megumi tells Yuji that he's figured out Awasaka's technique. After Megumi reveals what Awasaka's technique might be and how they can combat him, Yuji attacks Awasaka by throwing a car at him. Yuji and Megumi then fight Awasaka in close combat, and they manage to distract him using Megumi's toad and harm the enemy. Yuji and Megumi manages to then continue to harm Awasaka. When Awasaka tells them not to get too cocky, Yuji responds by preparing a powerful attack. Yuji delivers the punch, but stops just short and adjusts the power of his punch. Yuji then punches Awasaka and manages to defeat him. After tying up Awasaka, the two break the cursed tools, but notice that only one of the curtains has come down. As the two discuss what to do, Megumi notices that Takuma has been thrown off the tower, so Megumi and Yuji quickly rescue him. After rescuing Takuma, the two talk about what to do next, and Yuji plans to head to the station that Gojo has been sealed at, while Megumi takes Takuma to get medical treatment. As Yuji arrives at the station entrance, he notices that humans are being attacked by mutated humans. Yuji thinks about how there's no time to save them all, but Toge suddenly shows up. As Toge deals with the mutated humans, Yuji enters the station. Yuji comes across Choso, which causes Choso to start to attack Yuji. Yuji manages to defend himself and even gets close enough to attack Choso. Suddenly, Yuji notices that he can't move his right arm anymore, since he used it to defend against Choso, and thinks about how he will just attack with his left arm. Choso then asks if his brothers had any last words with him. Yuji remembers them and says that they simply cried. As Choso becomes angry, Yuji prepares to fight. Yuji notices the distance between the two and decides to bait Choso by jumping in the air. As Choso attacks, Yuji manages to dodge and close the distance between them. Suddenly, Yuji is wounded by Choso's supernova attack and is stabbed in the foot. Yuji ignores the pain and continues to attack. Yuji stops his attack when he thinks that Choso is going to use piercing blood, but Choso starts to attack with his flowing red scale attack. Choso then attacks with piercing blood, but Yuji manages to withstand the attack because Choso messed up the attack. Afterwards, Yuji is suddenly contacted by Kokichi again. While dodging Choso's attacks, Yuji listens as Kokichi informs him about what blood manipulation is capable of. When Kokichi advises Yuji to head into the bathroom, Yuji heads into the bathroom and hides after flooding the bathroom. When Choso enters the bathroom, Yuji attacks from behind and manages to send Choso into the water. Once Choso finds out that he can't manipulate his blood with all the water around them, Yuji and Choso fight in hand-to-hand combat. As Yuji manages to get the edge, Choso manages to land a blow with some blood that he kept out of the water. Yuji manages to stand his ground even though he's wounded, and thinks about how he knows that his duty is to take out Choso so that the others can save Gojo. Yuji continues his fight with Choso, and Yuji manages to land a few good hits, but Choso manages to knock Yuji into a wall. Just as Choso is about to finish Yuji off, he stops as a memory that didn't happen passed in his mind. After Choso leaves, Yuji is found by Mimiko and Nanako. The two start to feed Yuji Sukuna's fingers, but are forced to retreat when Jogo arrives. Jogo then feeds Yuji 10 of Sukuna's fingers, which Sukuna manages to take control. Later, Yuji manages to get back control and sees what Sukuna has done while he was in control. Yuji breaks down while commenting how he should just die. Suddenly, remembering how he's to be executed, along with how he should die with people around him, Yuji stops crying and thinks about how he has to keep fighting, since if he's executed now, then he would just be a murderer. Yuji then heads back to the station and encounters Nanami and Mahito. Yuji watches as Nanami is killed by Mahito, and then gets angry and prepares to fight Mahito. Yuji charges, but Mahito diverts his attention and gets behind Yuji. Mahito attacks with an attack which Yuji manages to stop the attack. Suddenly, Mahito appears from the attack and lands a blow on Yuji. Yuji asks why Mahito can kill so easily. The two then take a stance, and Mahito slowly closes a distance. Mahito tries to pierce Yuji's heart, but Yuji dodges it and lands a blow on Mahito. Mahito recollects himself and compliments Yuji while saying that it's now time for round 2. As the two continue to fight, Yuji chases after Mahito while Mahito attacks from a distance. While fighting, Yuji thinks about how Mahito has more moves compared to last time they fought. As Mahito escapes behind a corner, Yuji follows but finds two individuals. As Yuji tells them to get to safety, Mahito suddenly attacks from one of them and uses the other one to create a sword. Mahito tells Yuji that he needs to work on the imagination of his, as he asks Mahito to stop. Yuji continues facing off against Mahito as he sends 3 transfigured humans over at Yuji, who's blinded after one of them spits blood on him. As Mahito is about to attack Yuji, he suddenly stops as Yuji turns around and notices this. Yuji comes to the conclusion that the reason behind it is because Nobara's resonance technique. Yuji uses this chance to plummet Mahito with punches. Yuji thinks to himself and thanks Nobara for showing him that he's not alone. Upon having Mahito split himself, Yuji wonders which part of him contains his soul to finish him off. Noticing a part of Mahito who's surging with cursed energy, Yuji destroys it, but it ends up being a decoy. Yuji chases after Mahito as he encounters 2 Mahitos, wondering if they were to fuse to heal. Instead, the two pass each other, and Yuji notices Nobara. So he yells at her to run, but it's too late. Yuji smashes the second Mahito into a wall and states that he's in the way before running over to check on Nobara. Nobara tells Yuji it's not that bad, as she falls, leaving Yuji in complete shock. While Yuji is left frozen in shock, Mahito uses this chance to close in onto Yuji and attack him with Black Flash. Yuji doesn't do anything while Mahito continues to punch him. Before Mahito can kill Yuji, Todo shows up and uses Boogie Woogie to save Yuji as Arata Nita follows closely behind. Yuji tells Todo that he can't fight anymore as Sukuna has killed many people and he tried helping more people but failed. Claiming that he's a murderer, Yuji says he can't forgive himself as Mahito takes this chance to taunt and try to attack the group. However, they're able to evade the attack as Todo uses his technique and kicks Mahito away. Empowered by Todo's wise words, Yuji manages to get back up and is healed by Arata Nita using his curse technique. When Aoi uses his curse technique Boogie Woogie to teleport Yuji behind Mahito, Yuji is able to land a Black Flash on Mahito. Yuji thinks to himself about how he'll take Nanami's share of the suffering as Todo says welcome back to Yuji. The two continue to assault Mahito with punches and kicks. When Mahito uses Soul Multiplicity Blood Repel, Yuji and Todo are forced out of the building and they continue to face off outside. When Aoi goes to deal with the transfigured humans Mahito sent at him, Yuji continues to face off against Mahito until Todo shows up after he finished up dealing with the transfigured humans. Before Mahito activates Domain Expansion Self-Embodiment of Perfection for 0.2 seconds, Yuji runs towards Mahito but isn't quick enough as Mahito deactivates his Domain Expansion and runs past Yuji towards Todo. Before Mahito can use Idle Transfiguration on Aoi uses Mahito's hand to use Boogie Woogie and teleport Yuji in his place, who's able to land a Black Flash on Mahito. Mahito uses Polymorphic Soul Isomer and sends a transfigured human at Yuji to take care of. After taking care of the transfigured human, Yuji faces the newly transformed Mahito. Yuji comments on how it's a surprise that Mahito was a type for a journey of self-discovery. Mahito attacks Yuji but is able to dodge the attack and fails to land a kick on him. While facing off, Yuji notices how tough Mahito's body has become and notes on how it's much tougher than before. Yuji is suddenly grabbed by Mahito, who slams him into the ground, forcing the ground to cave in. Yuji thinks to himself about how he needs to imbue Black Flash with his maximum cursed energy to defeat Mahito. Mahito comments on how they both still have a lot in the tank and the two continue to phase off. Yuji manages to land a Divergent Fist, which leaves Mahito surprised by the second impact of the punch. When Aoi suddenly appears, Mahito is left shocked at his appearance, which leaves him unable to defend from Yuji's Black Flash attack. Yuji confronts Mahito and says he's Mahito and he will kill him. When Mahito runs away, Yuji follows when Geto suddenly appears. Upon noticing Geto's arrival, Yuji immediately yells at him to give Gojo back while charging at him. However, a pit suddenly appears where Yuji is. Instead of falling into the pit, Yuji instead falls back onto the ground as Geto summons cursed spirits to attack Yuji. When Mahito fails to attack Geto, Yuji is left to watch in shock as Mahito is absorbed by Geto. Yuji watches as the Kyoto students try to attack Geto, who tries to unleash Maximum Uzumaki on Miwa, but is saved by Atsuya Kusakabe. Panda and Noritoshi Kamo suddenly appear besides Yuji, who's happy to see Panda. With the sudden appearance of Choso, everyone, including Yuji, is left in shock as Choso angrily yells at Geto, who's his notorious father, Noritoshi Kamo, asking why he forced him to try and kill his younger brother Yuji. Yuji watches as Geto and Uraume face off against Choso as Panda asks him if they're actually related, with Yuji denying that they're related. Yuji agrees with Noritoshi and Panda that they must retrieve the prison realm. When Uraume suddenly uses Frostcom to freeze the enemies, Yuji is the only one who isn't frozen and manages to save Choso. Uraume uses Icefall to freeze everyone as Yuji thinks to himself about how they're going to die. However, the timely arrival of Yuki Tsukumo saves them all from death. When Yuki asks for Yuji to help her beat Geto up, Yuji apologizes for not being able to stand. Geto suddenly summons a large amount of curses, saying goodbye to Yuji while holding on to the prison realm, where Yuji yells, "Gojo-sensei." Itadori's Extermination Arc. A despondent Yuji sits alone on a large staircase as Choso approaches him, asking about his injuries. Yuji says that he's fine because of Sukuna, who he can tell is growing stronger. Choso says he'll be fine by himself while he collects the remains of Shoso and the others, telling Yuji that he can return to Jujutsu High. Yuji, however, replies that Sukuna has something planned for Megumi and that he himself has killed too many people, reminding Choso that he killed both Eso and Kechizu, his younger brothers. Choso calmly says that it was a misunderstanding and that forgiveness isn't involved when it comes to brothers. The two then head out to deal with the rest of the cursed spirits. Yuji lets out a clap as two large curses appear behind him. The cursed spirits follow Yuji, who's leading them to Choso's location. While Choso uses piercing blood to kill one of the spirits, Yuji punches the other remaining cursed spirit. Choso compliments on Yuji's improvement just as Naoya Zenin suddenly appears and comments on how Megumi isn't around. Yuji asks what business Naoya has with Megumi, who says he'll let him die. He suddenly appears in between Yuji and Choso and trades blows with the two. Before they can engage each other, a heavy presence suddenly fills the air as Yuta Okotsu appears and comments on how Yuji isn't alone. Choso tells Yuji that the two are after him and that it's best for him to run. Yuji manages to get ahead, but Yuta surprises him by managing to catch up to him, surprising Yuji with his speed. Yuji grabs a car and throws it at Yuta, who throws it back at Yuji. Yuji notices how much cursed energy is surging from Yuta. The two continue to face off as Yuji thinks about how he needs to get rid of the katana Yuta is wielding. Yuji runs away from Yuta and enters a car, taking a knife with him to defend against Yuta's sword strike. Yuji imbues the knife with his cursed energy and blocks Yuta's katana. However, he ends up being kicked by Yuta, who states Yuji is too focused on his katana. Yuji tries to defend himself with the knife, but it's slashed apart and Yuji's injured. He's able to kick Yuta away and also break the katana he's wielding as well. Yuji tries to close the distance between him and Yuta until the cursed spirit Rika shows up and restrains Yuji from moving. Yuji is confused by Rika's appearance, wondering if it's a Shikigami. He's then stabbed by Yuta, who apologizes. In a flashback, a young Yuji is held by his father, Jin, as Yuji's grandfather, Wasuke, asks him to leave a certain woman, and warns him that he would die otherwise. Jin asks for Wasuke to not talk about such things in front of Yuji, as babies remember more than they think. Wasuke begins to deliberate on his Kaori's death before he's cut off by the woman in question. Kaori, with stitches on her head, walking in, calling Wasuke father-in-law, and asking what they're talking about. In an unknown area, Yuji abruptly wakes up and looks at Yuta, who laughs and says what a relief. Yuji is confused by Yuta, who explains that he needed to put an act on because Gojo-sensei tasked him with watching over Yuji. Yuta also tells Yuji that in order for the Jujutsu higher-ups to approve of Yuta being Yuji's executioner, he had to go into a binding vow to kill him. He apologizes as Yuji asks how he's still alive, where Yuta reveals that he used the reverse curse technique at the same time when his heart stopped. Yuta also reveals that the Jujutsu higher-ups may figure out that Yuji isn't dead, but for now, they considered Yuji's death sentence complete. Yuji asks why Yuta is doing all of this, where he reveals that it's because Yuji is important to people who Yuta considers important. Yuta tells Yuji about how he too once bore a power that he couldn't handle, and that Yuji isn't to blame. Yuji says that Yuta doesn't understand, and it isn't about his fault just as Megumi walks in. Yuji is surprised by Megumi's appearance, as he tells him to head back to Jujutsu High. Yuji suddenly tells Megumi to stop as if nothing ever happened. He says he killed people, and because of himself, lots of people died, as Megumi angrily states it's our fault. Megumi tells Yuji to not be selfish and give up all alone. He also adds that they're Jujutsu sorcerers, and they aren't heroes fighting for justice. He He says that they must prove their worth of existence and don't have the luxury of thinking about themselves. Megumi also adds that they just have to save people. Yuji tells Megumi that as long as he's around, he will suffer. Megumi tells Yuji to start off by saving him, and reveals that Noritoshi Kamo has started a culling game for those involved with Jujutsu. He also says that Tsumiki is involved in this, and he needs Yuji's strength. Perfect preparation arc. Remembering his grandfather's dying words, Yuji turns to Yuta Okotsu and tells him that Sukuna is planning something for Megumi. He mentions that Sukuna most likely took over his body in Shibuya, and also includes that he's already eaten 15 fingers. Yuji says he doubts Sukuna would be able to take over his body after he's eaten the rest of the fingers. However, if Sukuna is able to, Yuji asks for Yuta to kill him, as he believes he's able to do that. Yuji then turns to ask Megumi what he should do. Megumi says that they will go back to Tokyo Jujutsu High and contact Master Tengen. He also adds that they will need to find out how to remove the seal on the prison realm and Noritoshi Kamo's objectives and future moves. Yuji asks if Tsukumo knows, and Megumi reveals that he's already spoken to her about it, and adds that this was her idea. Yuta comments that the problem is Tengen's concealing barrier. Megumi tells Yuji that Yuki is hiding in Jujutsu High, as she wants to avoid the Jujutsu higher-ups. Yuji then asks Megumi what happened to Nobara, who doesn't answer and avoids looking directly at Yuji. Choso suddenly appears and says there might be a way past the barrier that protects the tomb. Yuji asks what he means, and Choso reveals that Mahito was able to steal Sukuna's fingers along with the death painting wounds, and that they can do the same thing. Now at Tokyo Jujutsu High, Yuji is surprised to see Maki, who unenthusiastically greets them. When Maki asks who Choso is, Yuji says just to think of him as an older brother, which generates a surprised response from Choso. Instead of having Megumi explain about Tengen's barrier, Choso explains how he has a connection with the remaining death painting wounds being held at the warehouse and should be able to provide some guidance. The group heads into the door, which Yuji leaves Choso behind at the warehouse where the rest of the death painting wounds are being held at. Yuji, along with Megumi, Maki, Yuki, and Yuta go on ahead while Choso follows shortly behind them and enters the elevator down to where Tengen is. Yuji notices the bloodstains and asks what happened, where Yuki explains what happened 11 years ago. The group enters the main shrine and finds that there's nothing there. Just then, Master Tengen appears and asks why they're leaving so soon before greeting them, shocking Yuji and the others present. When Yuki confronts Tengen, asking about why they closed off the tombs of the Star Corridor, where they say that they were worried that they were aligned with Kenjaku. Confused by who Kenjaku is, Yuki asks who they are. Tengen reveals that they are the sorcerer who was once Noritoshi Kamo, and now is inhabiting Sukuru Gato's body. Yuji suddenly interrupts the conversation, asking why Master Tengen looks the way they look. Tengen says that they are immortal, but is not immune to aging, and that is the reason why they look the way they are. Tengen tells him that in 500 years, he'll look like this as well, which surprises Yuji. They tell the group that 11 years ago, when they failed to merge with a star plasma vessel, their aging accelerated, and their self-awareness as an individual diminished, and that the world became themselves. When Megumi and Yuta ask Tengen about Kenjaku's objectives and how to unlock the prison realm, Tengen says that there's one condition: Yuki, Tsukumo, Yuta Okotsu, and Choso must remain as their guards. Yuki objects to this and says it isn't fair because they haven't told them why and for how long they need to do it. Tengen explains about how Kenjaku's objective is to force the evolution of all human beings throughout Japan. Tengen reveals that the method Kenjaku has chosen is to merge humankind with themselves. They add on that if humankind evolves and only one person rages out, the world will end, as there would be no boundaries between individuals, so evil would instantly spread. Yuji asks Tengen why Kenjaku would do this, who's unsure why because they can't read human hearts. When Maki asks why they don't just refuse to merge, Tengen says that is the problem. Tengen tells the group that now that they're involved, they are more cursed spirit than human, which makes them a target for cursed spirit manipulation. Shocking everyone. Tengen tells them that considering Kenjaku's abilities as a sorcerer, he might be able to absorb them if they encounter each other. They add that this is the reason why their main body is rejecting everything at the tombs of the Star Corridor. Yuta wonders if that's the reason why they want guards, and Tengen gives a confirmative response. Yuki asks Tengen why all of this is happening now, and Tengen tells her that themselves, the Star Plasma Vessel and the Six Eyes are all connected by faith. After having lost twice to a sorcerer with the Six Eyes in the past, Kenjaku had switched to sealing instead of eradicating the Six Eyes, and thus began searching for the prison realm because two bearers of the Six Eyes cannot appear at the same time. Then came a boy with curse manipulation, and the unexpected happened: Toji Zenin's intervention. Tengen tells them that he was physically gifted throughout a heavenly restriction and was an anomaly who had zero cursed energy, and destroyed the path that was outlined for them by fate. That's when all the pieces suddenly came together, other than for the prison realm, which fell into Kenjaku's grasp 6 years ago. go. When Megumi asks why the Culling Game is happening, Tengen explains the Culling Game uses the participants and the boundaries binding barriers in a ritual that conveys the human beings of this country to the other side. With that, Kenjaku will begin the merging of the humans with Tengen. Tengen adds on that even if Kenjaku is killed, the Culling Game will continue until all participants are either dead or the players refuse to participate and die. Yuta concludes that they have no other choice but to participate and adds a rule that allows Sumiki and the other unwilling participants to safely get out. Megumi adds that they also should free Gojo-sensei because he would be able to settle everything on his own. Yuji looks over at Master Tengen and asks for them to tell them, but they say to first decide who should remain as guards. Much to the surprise of both Yuji and Megumi, Yuki and Choso step up for that position. Choso tells Yuji he will need either Okotsu or Yuki's cooperation, especially if Kenjaku comes for Tengen. Tengen thanks the group before pulling out a box that is the back of the prison realm. Yuji asks if it's like the back gate, which Tengen confirms it. Tengen tells them that Gojo is sealed inside the rear gate as well. They add on that to break it open, they will need the inverted Spear of Heaven that nullifies curse techniques, and or the black rope that disrupts and cancels curse technique effects. Unfortunately, both items were either destroyed or sealed by Satoru Gojo years earlier. Yuji and Megumi are very frustrated by this. Tengen reveals that among the players participating in the Culling Game, there's a sorcerer from 1,000 years ago who calls herself an angel and that her curse technique can extinguish any curse technique. When Megumi asks Master Tengen if they're aware where Hana Kurisu is, Tengen confirms this and tells them that she's in the colony on the east side of Tokyo. Tengen tells the group that there are 10 colonies around Japan and that they're connected by a barrier that forms a line that sends humans from Japan to the other side. Yuki asks if the reason why Hokkaido isn't included is because of the Jujutsu Society's barriers, where Tengen confirms and says that has already been established as the vast sacred area, with Yuji commenting on how that's rugged lands. Tengen tells them that conveyance to the other side may sound like an exaggeration, but a curse fell on everyone in Japan in preparation of the merger. Megumi asks how long will it take to complete the ritual, where they say it will most likely take 2 months. Maki says that it's currently 9 AM on November 9th. Yuta adds on that the sorcerer players awakened at about midnight on October 31st. Megumi comes to the conclusion that Sumiki only has 10 days and 15 hours to declare her participation, who then turns to Master Tengen and says that they mentioned those who refuse to participate in the Culling Game will be killed. Maki then says how Shoko was correct about the curse technique removal, and also adds on that sorcerers without a curse technique such as herself aren't at risk. Yuji wonders about the civilians who are already inside a barrier, but Tengen says that they will be given a chance to exit, much to Yuji's surprise. Tengen says that there's no rule about entering or exiting colonies, and adds on that from the start, players are given a clear objective of exiting the barrier, and that they suppose this is for stimulating the game. Tengen tells them that in order to confine the players, the premise that they enter of their free will is important. Yuji thinks about what Ino told him about the increase or decrease of barriers' effectiveness. Tengen tells them that each player will receive a Shikigami that's called a Kogane. Tengen adds that a Kogane is less Game Master than an interface. They say that they may think of the Game Master as the Culling Game programmer, which confuses Yuji. Yuji says that they're unable to subtract rules that have already existed, while Megumi says that there are ways to counteract the rules. Choso asks if the 6th rule is fair, which Yuta confirms, while Maki comments on how it gives the Game Master a lot of leeway. Yuji is disappointed that he will be forced to kill people again, but Megumi tells him that he has a few ideas. Maki tells them that's all the information they have, and now that they all have a role to play, with Yuki and Choso remaining as Master Tengen's guards. Maki says that she'll return to the Zenin family and collect cursed tools. She reveals that soon after Satoru Gojo was sealed, the Kamo and Zenin family went to Tokyo Jujutsu High's cursed warehouse and completely emptied it. Maki also includes that Megumi is now the current Zenin family leader, much to Yuji's surprise. Maki adds on that thanks to Megumi being the new family leader, it's possible to search the Zenin family's warehouse at length. She then turns to Master Tengen and asks about Juzo Kumiya's warehouse. Maki tells them that afterwards she will go look for Panda and help address the game. Yuta says that he will enter a colony immediately before Sumiki Fushiguro is needed to enter the game, as he wants to gain more information. He says that he will avoid nearby colonies so they won't end up killing each other. Yuta and Yuji realize that Yuji asks for Yuta to kill him if Sukuna ever takes over his body, and that Yuta won't be able to do that if they're separated. Megumi assures Yuji that it won't happen, but if it does happen and Megumi dies, to just have Okotsu kill him. Yuji says that the point is to not let that happen. Megumi turns to Maki, who tells them to go to Kinji Hakari as planned, but Yuji doesn't know who that is. Yuta reveals that Kinji is a suspended 3rd year. Yuji asks if he's tough, and Yuta tells him that when Kinji is worked up, he's stronger than him. But Maki says it's not true. Yuji, along with Maki, Yuta Okotsu, and Megumi start heading out. On his way out, Yuji calls out to Choso and thanks him for his help. Choso tells him not to die. Before leaving the room, Master Kengan informs Yuji and Megumi that Kinji is making money as a bookie for an underground fight club. They also add on that spectators are mostly non-sorcerers and possibly curse users in the crowd. In the forest, Yuji and Megumi are changing clothes where Yuji wonders why they're changing clothes. Megumi tells him that Kinji got into a fight with the authorities and was suspended from school and currently is engaged in illegal Jujutsu activities. He adds that if Kinji recognizes they're from Jujutsu High, he is likely to bolt. The two head towards the underground fight club as Yuji wonders if they're on Jujutsu High's side and if Kinji will cooperate. Megumi tells him that he's not sure, and all the upperclassmen says he's a good for nothing, whereas Yuta says he's stronger than himself. Megumi tells Yuji that they will need his strength as one of the two guards tell the pair to leave as the place isn't for kids. Megumi calmly tells the guard that they need money, much to Yuji's confusion. The guard swings his arm to punch Megumi, who remains motionless as the guard states that Rule 1 is no one says anything about the club, asking Megumi where he got the information or he'll beat him up. Yuji watches Megumi lie to the guard and that he didn't get the name of the individual he fought against before he killed him, saying that it was about a month ago that the one he fought against was a scumbag. Megumi says to let him take the place as Yuji realizes what Megumi is doing, keeping his mouth shut as the other guard announces that the boss is fine with it. The dark-haired guard continues on and points to Yuji and that he will be the one who will fight, who's surprised by this. After the pair accept the deal, Yuji tells Megumi that all the bluffing he's done was risky, who tells Yuji that it isn't, telling him that if curse users are fighting, there must be something else to it. Yuji comments that if Kinji was actually watching through the security cameras, then it's likely that he's present. Megumi tells Yuji that he will fight and get a look around while he sneaks into the garage possibly. Megumi says that they want to see what he's doing and adds on that if they find him attempting to sneak in, there's no chance of getting them to trust him, along with being unable to meet Kinji. Yuji says that if that were to happen, they can just use force as Megumi tells him that's a last resort. Megumi says he should lie low for tonight, but also doesn't want to waste any more time before Sumiki's deadline as Yuji goes on to check his phone, stating that it's 5 p.m. on the 10th, which leaves them 9 days. Megumi tells Yuji that he will sneak in to look for Kinji. However, if things get troublesome, he's out, as Yuji agrees to the plan. Later on, Yuji's inside of the room with the same guard as before, who informs him of the two rules. The first rule is not to run away, and the second is no usage of curse techniques. Yuji is confused as to why curse techniques are off limits, as the guard tells him that there are non-sorcerers in the crowd who won't be able to see them, before adding on that an invisible fight isn't fun to watch. Yuji then asks why running away isn't allowed, where the guard says he will have to fight where the spectators can see him. He then continues on with his questions, asking how's the boss like, as the guards ask him if he's curious, where Yuji confirms. The guard tells him that there are two types of fights, unscripted, such as today's tournament, and scripted fights. The guard goes to open a door as they tell Yuji to look sharp, and he will have the possibility to talk to the boss. Yuji is excited and puts on a smile. Now inside of the fight ring, Yuji asks if they had removed the upper floor for the spectators and left the lower floor for the fight to happen, which the guard confirms. Yuji is shocked by who his opponent is, as the guard tells him that they were shocked the first time they saw him as well. A sudden voice calls out and welcomes everyone to the Kachinko Fight Club tournament, stating their name to the announcer, John Bobby. The announcer continues on and announces the fighters, the dangerous Fireball Kid, Yuji Itadori, and his opponent, Panda. The fight starts where Yuji and Panda trade blows as the announcer comments on the fight. While in battle, Yuji asks Panda if he's met Kinji, who declines, telling him that because Kinji is aware of who he is and isn't suspicious of him, but he's avoiding him. Panda tells him that the other third-year sorcerer is also a problem. Panda asks if Yuji's hiding that he's a Jujutsu student, which he confirms, saying that Yuji will know what to do next. Yuji suddenly punches Panda, which sends him flying, as Panda complains about being unable to move and how the Animal Welfare Society won't allow this. Yuji thinks to himself about how bad of an actor Panda is, as the announcer says that the winner is Yuji. Kirara leads Yuji into a room as they wonder if Yuji is a first year in high school, calling Yuji Yu, which confuses him. They continue on that Kinji had to repeat a year in junior high, saying that Yuji seems cheerful and that they love it. Inside of the room with Kinji, he asks Yuji, if I told you there was a job where you could get 1 million yen a month just for doing a certain thing for 1 hour a day, would you believe me? Leaving Yuji confused. Yuji tells Kinji that it depends on what the work is. Kinji's response to this is telling Yuji that in order for him to be able to know what the work is, he must purchase the information for 200 yen. Shocked by this, Yuji comments on how it sounds dishonest, which is confirmed by Kinji, who says that this is a typical scamming method. He continues on talking about how the scammer pretends to be wealthy and then sells information on how to to get rich, thus becoming rich. Kinji says that it's easy enough to see the lie, but only if they aren't idiotic to be fooled by it. He says the reason why is because of passion. Kinji continues on telling Yuji that people get carried away by their passion and ends up making rash decisions. He says that people without passion can fall in love, and that both the scammer and the scammed have passion, which is, I'm going to change my life. He then tells Yuji that he loves people's passions, and asks Yuji if he knows what the more direct exchange of passion is, who responds confused with gambling. Kinji confirms Yuji's answer, continue on to tell him that life is a gamble, and that a mountain of women that dumped him because they despised gambling got it wrong. He says that the ones who can't bet big and doesn't know when to call it quits are the ones cast aside from society. He adds on that there isn't a single person on earth who doesn't gamble. What they hate isn't gambling, but instead loss and ruin. Yuji wonders, aren't there some people who just want peaceful lives? But Kinji responds by saying he doesn't know anyone like that. He tells Yuji that passion is gambling is life, and love is control. He says that with his fight club, he eventually will want to control the country's passion. He says that now is the perfect time to expand his business as the existence of cursed spirits have been publicized, and the Jujutsu headquarters is barely functional. Kinji says he'll crush all obstacles and force them to publicly accept his fight club in upcoming Jujutsu regulations. He adds on that he will need capable pawns for this, and asks Yuji to get carried away by his passion. Yuji thinks back to Megumi telling him not to mention Jujutsu High until the very end, and just as he's about to say something, a phone rings and interrupts him. Kinji ignores the phone and asks Yuji if he would fancy a drink. He says yes, but asks for no alcohol, which surprises Kinji, who wonders if Yuji can't handle liquor. Yuji tells Kinji that it isn't because of that, but instead, he's underaged. Kinji comments on how Yuji doesn't look like the type to care about that. He continues and tells Yuji about how Gojo can't handle liquor, where Yuji asks who Gojo is, and adds on that he can handle liquor. However, Kinji interrupts and says that there isn't a single sorcerer who doesn't know who Satoru Gojo is, and asks why he's pretending he doesn't know who Gojo is. Kinji finishes his drink, which scares Yuji, as he asks Yuji if he's from Jujutsu High. Yuji attempts to reason with him, but Kinji doesn't listen, as two doors surround Yuji, who manages to dodge it. Yuji continues trying to reason with him, but Kinji kicks him away as another set of doors close around his neck. Kinji says that a call from Kirara is a signal for an emergency, before continuing to brutally attack Yuji, who manages to defend himself before grabbing Kinji's shirt collar and slamming his forehead against Kinji's. Yuji yells at Kinji to listen, who refuses and says he's already cooled off. As the two continue fighting, Yuji is kicked out through a door by Kinji, who readies himself to punch Yuji, who tells Megumi and Panda to stay out of his fight. Kinji tells Yuji that he's underestimating him and punches Yuji, who manages to stand up despite Kinji's punch. However, blood squirts out of Yuji's nose as Kinji tells Yuji that he's insane, but he'll still listen what they have to say. That is, if Yuji's able to withstand his cursed energy-infused punch. Kinji asks Yuji why he came to him for help, despite this being the first time they've met, where Yuji responds by saying that his upperclassmen said that Kinji is strong. Kinji punches Yuji, which ends up with him flying back and claims that's what he thought, as Yuji wonders about Kinji's punches, which are painful and feel like he's been slugged by a baseball bat with razors. Kinji yells at Yuji, telling him that when a sorcerer asks another sorcerer for help, they're basically asking, please risk your life with me. He continues to tell Yuji that they will need to convey a fever worthy of making him risk his life, saying that instead of doing that, Yuji came to him because he was told to. He asks what Yaga is doing, saying that Yaga was supposed to find weaklings like Yuji. Responding calmly, Yuji tells Kinji that he doesn't have a fever and that he's a cog. Annoyed, Kinji asks Yuji if he's being serious, telling him that's boring before going to punch him, which sends him crashing into a railing. He asks Yuji if it hurts, and according to Gojo, his cursed energy is rougher than others. Not getting an answer from Yuji, who remains limp, Kinji wonders if Yuji's dead before calling out to Panda and Megumi to retrieve Yuji and get lost. Before he could finish his sentence, Kinji's surprised by Yuji standing behind him, who says that he's a cog, and that cogs have a role. With his role to exercise curses, he says that if Kinji's help is needed to do that, Yuji will follow him everywhere until Kinji says yes. Yuji goes up close to Kinji and asks him what's his role, who's surprised by the determination in Yuji's eyes. Kinji goes on to say that he'll hit Yuji. However, before he could finish his sentence, Kirara interrupts by asking Kinji if he's getting heated. Kinji tells Megumi to come down to make a deal before smacking Yuji. The four of them sit down to talk, where Kinji is understandably shocked by Gojo being sealed, with Panda, Megumi, and Yuji confirming this. Panda speaks up by telling them that Yaga has died. He apologizes for keeping quiet about it, but confirms it's true. He reassures Yuji that he didn't die at Shibuya, but he got into a scuffle with the higher-ups after the incident. Yuji says that even knowing that doesn't make it alright. He tries to continue on, but Panda cuts him off, telling him that it's alright and thanks him for his concern. After a short discussion, Kinji agrees to help them with the Culling Game. However, he tells them that he hasn't let his feelings get the best of him, and after the Culling Game is over, Megumi, Panda, and Yuji will have to cooperate with him. Panda comes to the conclusion that Kinji is trying to take advantage of the revisions to Jujutsu law as the existence of cursed spirits have been made public, asking Kinji what exactly he's trying to do. Megumi says that whatever Kinji's planning on doing, he doubt it will be difficult, prompting Kinji to ask him what he knows, who calmly replies that he's the Zenin family head, much to Kinji and Kirara's surprise, calling him Sea Urchin Head once again, only for Megumi to correct him that it's Fushiguro. Kinji asks for them to get along, confusing Megumi. Panda tells the group that they'll have to decide on who's going to which colony, asking On that he believes Yuta was heading to Miyagi. Moments later, a Kogane appears over Yuji's head, announcing that a player has added a rule to the Culling Game. Rule 9. Players can now view the information of other players such as name, points, number of times they've added rules, and residing colony. Megumi asks the Kogane why it sounds different all of a sudden, who responds by telling the group it's speaking as the liaison assigned to Yuji, which generates a response from Panda, who says that Master Tengen did say something regarding it. Megumi comments on how it already counted Yuji as a player in the Culling Game, and aside from the people who received cursed techniques and cursed objects from Kenjaku, people only became a player upon entering a colony. Yuji says it's Sukuna, and it's a possibility that one of the sorcerers entered a contract with Kenjaku and became the cursed object. Megumi still says it's strange, pointing out that Yuji ingested Sukuna's finger of his own will and that he witnessed it, telling Yuji that they'll discuss it later. Megumi tells Yuji to ask his Kogane to show the player info, who does so and points out one of the players, Kashimo Hajime. He continues on by saying Kashimo previously had 200 points and wonders why they added an additional rule, which Yuji says that they must have killed at least 40 people in the last few days, and he doubts the reasons are nice. Megumi tells him that they can continue on with the Culling Game without killing anyone and asks for the Kogane to show him players with 100 points or more. The Kogane tells Megumi that it's assigned to Yuji, but Yuji reassures the Kogane and tells them to do what Megumi asked them to do. With the Kogane searching, Megumi tells them that unless people caught in the game like Tsumiki rush to get out of the barriers, every past sorcerer in a new body must have had an incentive for entering a contract with Kenjaku. He continues on and says that he doubts they have much motivation to participate in the Culling Game, and if there are any other players with plenty of points such as Kashimo. But before he can finish, Yuji interrupts and says he understands what he's getting at. Yuji says they will need to find someone with 100 points or more who isn't interested in adding rules, which Megumi continues his line of thought and says that he will need to press the player to make a rule to allow Tsumiki out of the Culling Game. Just as they finish, the Kogane is finished with the search and shows the players with 100 points or more. Megumi notices that there's another player with 100 points and says the problem they've run into is Rule 8, so they'll need to offset that. However, both Yuji and Panda aren't sure of what Rule 8 is and asks what the rule is. Megumi says they could add a rule that allows players to transfer points among themselves, which the Kogane confirms this. He continues on and says that if friends continue to keep passing around points, they won't lose their cursed techniques and die. Megumi says that if possible, they could add another rule to spend points to get out of the game. Kinji comments on Megumi's proposed rule and asks if it conflicts with the rule regarding of long-lasting effect on the game. Megumi says he believes so as well, but he says it could work on the condition that the player drags a substitute non-player into the game. Kinji says that it would depend on what the Kogane says. Yuji says that they have a plan of action, which Megumi says that as they look for the angel to break the prison realm seal, they'll target Hajime Kashimo and Hiromi Higuruma and hunt them down. Culling Game Arc. Using the Kogane to view the players, Yuji says that Angel isn't on the list. Panda says that Angel is probably not her real name like Yuji and Sukuna. Megumi tells them that Master Tengen mentioned she's on the eastern side of Tokyo, inside the number 2 colony. Kinji asks them if they're aware how Angel looks like, where Megumi tells them that they'll only know once they see her. Kinji asks them if he's sure about that, but continues on without waiting for a response from Megumi, telling them that he and Panda will go to Tokyo colony number 2, while Megumi and Yuji will go to number 1, and Kirara will be on standby outside of the barrier. Panda asks why Kinji suggested it, where Kinji responds by saying that judging from the points, Kashimo is the strongest individual, and it's reasonable for him to be the one to fight the latter, while Kirara complains about being left out. Kinji continues talking to prove his point that Panda, having a good nose, should be the one focusing on the search for Angel. He adds on that they haven't been contacted by Yuta, meaning that their phones can't be used inside the barrier, so they should have someone outside observing the situation outside. Kirara ends up agreeing with their plan, with Yuji commenting on how he and Megumi should be on separate teams, concerned about Sukuna, only for Megumi to yell at him to shut up, informing Yuji that the roles of their 3 senpai can't be changed, so Yuji should stop being self-centered, much to his shock. Getting into a small argument, Yuji claims that he's being considerate of Megumi, who fires back by asking if he's going to say that every time, and that he can't be bothered as it's a waste of time. Noticing the two arguing, Panda tells them simply to stop fighting. Ready to enter the Culling Games, Yuji, Megumi, Panda, and Kinji all ready themselves to enter the Culling Game and confirms with the Kogane that they're ready to enter and become a player. Before the two enter the barrier where the Culling Game was taking place, Megumi tells Yuji that they need to beware of incarnated sorcerers from the past, which Yuji agrees with him. Yuji asks Megumi to explain to him, who is a bit annoyed but nevertheless explains that some of them are from 1,000 years ago, but even people from 100 or 200 years ago valued life differently, and they're also sorcerers. Fighting to the death used to be a normal thing, and they desired it, which is likely why they entered into a contract with Kenjaku. Megumi adds on the possibility that Kashimo and Higuruma are past sorcerers, so they shouldn't expect any negotiations. Yuji says that aside from them, the cursed spirits are the most aggressive ones at night, but a modern-day sorcerer embroiled in the Culling Game like Sumiki would probably be happy to exchange information. As the two arrive at the barrier, a Kogane appears and asks them are they willing to become a player and participate in the Culling Game, which Megumi confirms. When the Kogane asks Megumi if he wants to consult the rules, he tells the Kogane that isn't necessary. He then tells Yuji that they first need information on Higuruma before entering into the barrier. Now inside the barrier, Yuji falls from the sky and wonders where Megumi is. As he's falling down from the sky, Yuji notices someone standing atop a building and wonders if that's a player with a light for guidance. However, someone from further away atop a building flies into Yuji, who's unscathed from the surprise attack. Yuji gets ready to attack and throws a cursed energy-infused chunk of the broken building at his attacker, who's wounded by the attack. Yuji is surprised by how easily the woman fell, but he needs to ask about Higuruma and also find where Megumi is. As he turns around, yet another Culling Game player appears and yells at Yuji, asking him what he did to his woman, who says to himself he'll ask the man regarding Higuruma. Yuji throws a chunk of the building at the man, who easily blocks it via his propeller-like hair as Yuji charges at the man, suddenly grabbing the individual's leg and throwing him down the building. Yuji thinks to himself about how he thought the man would keep the advantage of having the higher ground, but instead, he only attacks with his propeller. He comes to the conclusion that the man will have to come down to get him, and he'll lure him indoors and enter a building via a broken window. Yuji waits inside as the man enters with his propeller spinning, telling Yuji he'll make a smoothie out of him. Yuji remains unresponsive and instead charges up his cursed energy in his fist, waiting for the correct time to punch the man's head. Suddenly, Yuji's hand squirts out blood as the man laughs, asking Yuji if his fist broke, and tells him he's the loser of the fight. However, Yuji surprises the man and kicks him, sending him crashing backwards. Yuji shakes his hand and tells the man that it's not broken before walking over to them, asking if they know about a sorcerer named Higuruma. He lowers himself to the man and thinks to himself about when is a good time to ask questions in these types of situations. Someone calls out to him and tells Yuji that he knows the one named Higuruma. The individual greets Yuji and asks him if he remembers who he is, and Yuji remains confused, wondering how he knows his name and asks who they are. They apologize and says only he'll know who Yuji is because he's famous. He tells Yuji that he's the Tiger of West Junior High, which strikes a memory in Yuji, who remembers who they were from. As the two walk together, Yuji asks if it's okay for them to be walking together, as he was the other two people who had attacked him earlier. They tell Yuji that he's just a gopher, and he would have been killed soon anyways. He introduces himself as Rin Amai, and Yuji asks where Higuruma is. Amai tells Yuji that the stronger ones gather where the city used to prosper because that's where plenty of supplies are, telling Yuji that Higuruma is in Ikebukuro. Yuji wonders if Megumi is in Ikebukuro as well. Rin tells Yuji that Higuruma uses a theater as a base, and Yuji thanks the latter and heads off, only to stop as Rin calls out to him, asking him if he's serious about it. Yuji tells Rin that he needs to meet up with a friend and he's also in a hurry. Rin tells Yuji he's never met Higuruma, but he once beat Haba to a pulp, and that he beat up Haba and comes to the conclusion that if he needs to, he'll be able to run away and leave. As Yuji enters the theater, he's surprised to find Higuruma in a bathtub, who asks him who he is and what he's doing there, which Yuji responds the same way. Higuruma asks Yuji if he's ever taken a bath with clothes on, where Yuji replies, no. Higuruma says that it feels better than what he expected. He adds on that when he was in elementary school, he liked the swimming classes where they had to wear clothes. He says that these days he doesn't care about much, and that he's challenging himself to do things he previously thought he shouldn't do, and went off the rail. He asks Yuji if he finds that funny, and he says yes. Yuji asks the man if he's Higuruma, who confirms, and just as Yuji says, he wants to talk. Higuruma tells him to wait, as he's a lawyer, so talking to him costs 5,000 yen every half hour. This confuses Yuji, as Higuruma tells him that he was merely joking. He says that he wanted to play the money-grabbing lawyer for a change. Yuji comes to the conclusion that there's something odd about Higuruma, and goes straight to the point of asking Higuruma if he scored 100 points. Yuji thinks to himself about how Higuruma isn't a reincarnated sorcerer, and that he's a modern-day sorcerer whose curse technique has awakened, coming to the conclusion that Higuruma will listen to him and make a deal. Yuji tells Higuruma that they want to put an end to the Culling Games, or rather negating the forced killing, asking Higuruma if he can use his 100 points to add a rule. Higuruma tells Yuji that he'll be blunt and says no. Yuji, clearly annoyed, asks if that's a joke as well. Higuruma tells him that it isn't a joke and that the Culling Game presents possibilities. He says that the law is powerless and asks about the Culling Game's rules, saying that if the power he has received is real, then so are the rules. He continues to add on that if rule breakers got punished according to the natural law without any charge, prosecutions, or trials, wouldn't that be wonderful? Saying that he recognizes that rules aren't perfect, but he wants to preserve the Culling Game's basic mechanics, so he doesn't want to end it so soon. He says that when it comes to rules 2 and 8, he'd like to see curse technique removal at least once. Yuji tells Higuruma that the curse technique removal is part of the Culling Game ritual, adding on that if they wait too long, everyone in the country will die. Higuruma tells Yuji that he doubts it and that the Culling Game celebrates permanence. Yuji nervously thinks to himself about how he doesn't understand that part either, before charging up his cursed energy, asking Higuruma to allow him to use his 100 points. Higuruma gets out of the bathtub and asks if he's ever killed someone who annoys themselves, adding that it feels better than what he expected. Yuji notices something behind Higuruma and wonders if that's a Shikigami. He thinks to himself about how Higuruma has 100 points and may have killed 20 sorcerers, so instead of charging, he'll instead start on the defense, and will be ready for any attack. Higuruma activates domain expansion as Yuji charges at Higuruma with the motive of taking him out before he can activate his curse technique. However, instead of landing a blow on Higuruma, Yuji's foot is stopped a few inches away from Higuruma's face. Higuruma tells Yuji that his domain forbids the use of violence for the both of them. Yuji is sent back to where he once was, confusing him as Higuruma tells him that the verbal violence is another matter, before asking Judge Man to begin. Judge Man begins by saying Yuji is under suspicion of entering the Maji Vegas pachinko parlor on July 16, 2017 in Sendai City, Miyagi Prefecture, despite being under 18 years of age at the time. Yuji is confused by this, before realizing and thinks to himself. Higuruma tells Yuji that Judge Man knows everything about everyone within the domain, but tells Yuji not to worry, telling him that the verdict depends solely upon the arguments that he and Yuji present. Higuruma pulls out an envelope and says that is the evidence of Yuji's crime, telling the surprised Yuji that the envelope was what Judge Man had submitted for deliberation. He says that the evidence is not necessarily conclusive, and Yuji won't be told what it contains, and that Yuji must state his case to dispel all doubts, and therefore he will win a pronouncement of innocence from Judge Man. Yuji thinks to himself about how Higuruma is a real lawyer, and wonders if his curse technique is for trials and he's persecuting him. He thinks back to what something Master Tengen said about domains, coming to the conclusion that Higuruma's domain expansion isn't necessarily fatal and can't physically harm him, and that it relies on a binding vow that requires an explanation of the rules. Higuruma tells Yuji that both Yuji and himself have one chance to make a statement. After Yuji's statement, he will offer a rebuttal based on the evidence, and then Judge Man will deliver a lawful verdict. Yuji asks what will happen if Judge Man says he's guilty, where Higuruma apologizes and says that he doesn't have to answer that, but he will tell Yuji something else. Yuji has 3 options: silence, confession, and denial, adding on that denial may include false statements. Yuji wonders if he can lie in court, and Higuruma says that if everyone tells the truth, there will be no need for trials. He tells Yuji to begin his self-defense, and that Judge Man isn't very patient. Yuji is silent as he thinks to himself about how he did in fact go to the pachinko parlor and pay the machines, and thinks that he won, so he thinks that lying is the only way to get off. However, the problem comes in where he isn't aware of what the evidence is. He continues thinking about the options he has: stay silent or deny it if the evidence doesn't prove that he entered the pachinko parlor. If the evidence only proves that he entered the parlor, he can say it was for another reason, but if the evidence is like option 1, he wouldn't be admitting that he went in, leading to him digging his own grave. And finally, if the evidence proves he only went in but also played, then he's basically screwed. He thinks that he could try confessing in hopes of a lighter sentence, but wonders if this court even does those sort of things. Yuji confirms that he went into the parlor, but only to take a dump, thinking to himself about how he refuses and doesn't know if he can plead for an extenuating circumstance. Higuruma opens the envelope and pulls out a piece of paper, saying that it's now his turn. The photo, which came from inside the envelope, shows an image of Yuji from a security camera at a cash exchange window near Maji Vegas on the day in question. He asks if Yuji exhibits the appearance and the build of the accused. Higuruma continues on and says that pairing the photo with his own admission of entering the premises casts Yuji's story about the restroom in doubt, which determines that despite being underage, Yuji entered with the intent of playing the machines. Yuji is in shock of what he's guilty of, as Higuruma continues talking with it being unlawful entry, Article 130 Penal Code, and that after all, laws specifically made for entertainment establishments don't allow punishing minors. Yuji says that it isn't fair and there wasn't anything he could have said, wondering to himself if he should have chosen option 1. Higuruma says that Japan forbids gambling, so parlors and cash exchanges are separate legal entities, and in some cases, multiple parlors share one exchange, but Yuji is only on trial for the parlor. He tells Yuji that he only needed to deny it by saying, "I've never seen a pachinko parlor," before telling him that it's time for the verdict. Judgment says Yuji is guilty. The pair are transported out of the domain, but Judgment found Yuji guilty. He says that he doesn't feel any different as Higuruma uses his gavel to land a surprise hit on Yuji and throws his gavel, charging at Yuji only for his hammer to reappear, enlarged, which slams into Yuji. Throwing him into the seats, Yuji is surprised that Higuruma can make his gavel appear and disappear, and can even change sizes. Higuruma comments on how tough Yuji is, who replies that that's one thing he's got going for himself, but he's unable to control his cursed energy. Being unable to use his cursed energy, Yuji is forced to dodge Higuruma's attack, but gets hit a few times. Higuruma stops fighting to ask Yuji if he can't use his cursed energy, who is confused by the question, but nevertheless confirms thanks to Higuruma. He tells Yuji that the penalty of confiscation temporarily makes it impossible to use cursed techniques, but he suspects Yuji doesn't have a cursed technique, so the effect must have switched to preventing the use of the cursed energy. Thinking to himself how frightening it is to think about, Higuruma says that confiscation is usually an additional punishment, accompanying another punishment, and decides to fight him at full strength. Higuruma starts attacking once more, where Yuji attempts to run away and snatch Higuruma's gavel, but the gavel disappears. Yuji jumps backwards and kicks the bathtub towards Higuruma, who easily destroys it, enlarging his gavel and attempting to crush Yuji. But he manages to withstand it, surprising Higuruma with Yuji's strength. Underneath the gavel, Yuji's panicking about how bad of a situation it is, wondering how long he can last, and he needs his cursed energy back, and fast. He thinks about how powerful Higuruma is, but there also must be a compensatory weakness. Thinking, Yuji thinks up of court trials and tells Higuruma that he wants a retrial, transporting the two of them back into Higuruma's domain. Higuruma comments on how Yuji is starting to understand it, while Yuji is on his knees, thinking about how close that was, and asks if he's allowed to get a second trial. Yuji gets back up and demands for a second trial, which Judge Man responds with the following crime. Yuji Itadori stands accused of mass murder in Shibuya on October 31st, 2018. Yuji confirms that he did it, and says he's not lying nor will he deny it, surprising Higuruma as Judge Man calls out guilty, confiscation, and death penalty. Higuruma's gavel transforms into the executioner's sword, who readies himself to kill Yuji. He says that every time he tried to help another person, he thought of the word ugly and says that includes Yuji, continuing on to say that all people are weak and ugly, no matter how high-minded a soul he aspired to. He yells at Yuji that there's nothing more to it. The darkness before his eyes is just darkness, and that even if Yuji can shine a light, all he'll see is more emptiness before himself. Higuruma goes to attack Yuji, but he had removed his shirt to act as a decoy among the chairs, attempting to attack Higuruma from behind by tripping him, but Higuruma dodges his attack. Yuji goes to punch Higuruma in the gut, which sends him crashing into the seats, who remain there, saying Article 39 Clause 1 of the Penal Code. The absence of reason or control signifies non-compos mentis, and that Sukuna possessed the body. Yuji asks how he knows of this, saying that he couldn't control himself and he didn't abandon self-control voluntarily. Higuruma finishes Yuji's sentence by saying that he's innocent and that he didn't commit the crime. Yuji tells Higuruma that even if he didn't commit that crime, it's still his fault because he was too weak. Higuruma continues staring up at the ceiling as Yuji asks why he dispelled his curse technique, who tells Yuji he remembered why he got into law in the first place. He says that there may still be lots of people who are weak like Yuji, and tells him to put his clothes back on and sit down as he'll give Yuji the 100 points. Yuji goes to grab his hoodie and sits down as he puts it back on, and Higuruma asks if he's killed anyone of his own free will, which he confirms as Higuruma asks if it felt awful. Higuruma asks for the Kogane to add a rule, making it possible to transfer points between players. He says that this will affect the calculation of scores for Rule 8 as the Kogane approves of this new rule. Yuji lets out a sigh of relief as Higuruma orders the Kogane to give Yuji one of his points and tells Yuji that now neither of them will be subjected to a curse technique removal for 19 days. Higuruma gets out of his seat and says goodbye as Yuji asks what he's going to do now and asks if Higuruma will help them. Higuruma tells him that his 2 leftover points are from the judge and prosecutor he killed before coming to Tokyo, and when the barrier opens, he'll turn himself in. Until then, he'll ponder his course of action and adds on that if he stayed with Yuji, he'll just hate himself more and apologizes that he wasn't criticizing Yuji. As Higuruma leaves and shuts the door behind himself, Yuji is left standing there. Did you enjoy our video? Be sure to check out these other great videos from the Amagi, and make sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos. Hope you enjoyed. I'm out.